Welcome to Delaney Diamond Presents an Author Chat, where we interview authors about their books, writing process, and personal lives. This show is sponsored by the Delaney Diamond Readers Lounge, an online community of readers where we bond over great books and support programs that promote literacy and book distribution. To join us, visit DelaneyDiamond.com and select the Readers Lounge tab.
Welcome to Delaney Diamond Presents an Author Chat. I'm your host, Delaney Diamond, author of sensual and passionate romance in the contemporary romance and romantic suspense genres. Today, I'm chatting with author Marcia King-Gamble about her novel, Naughty in New York. But before we get started, let me take a few minutes to introduce the author to you. USA Today bestselling writer Marcia King-Gamble originally hails from a sunny Caribbean island where the sky and ocean are the same mesmerizing shade of blue. This former travel industry executive has spent most of her life in the United States. A national bestselling author, Marcia has penned over 34 books and 8 novellas. She has contributed to Michael Fiore's Digital Romance, Inc., and served as a moderator on the now defunct eHarmony advice boards. Having witnessed the bad, the ugly, and the not so good in relationships, she still prefers to write about happily ever after. Caring for her animal family keeps her grounded and sane. Hello, Marcia. How are you?
I'm fine, Delaney, and thanks so much for having me. And it's good to see Mitzi, I guess, and Sharon and Teresa, and I don't know if I'm missing anyone else on. Thank you for coming.
Yes, thank you. So I'm excited to talk to you about the novel. And basically what we do to get started, we talk to you a little bit about your personal life, get to know you before we dive into the story, all right? So I'm going to kick things off by asking you, which Caribbean island are you from?
How did I know you were going to get there? I'm from a small British island. It's called St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Most people have either never heard of it, but I guess just to probably jog people's memory, it's probably about 1.5 years or 2 years ago, we have a volcano on that island, and the volcano erupted for like the second time in 20 years. So everybody was just keeping their fingers crossed, but it made the national news, and that kind of made us visible. So that's where we are. We're Southern Caribbean.
Yeah, I remember when that happened. I have a friend who's from St. Vincent, and she still has family there. Do you still have a lot of family there?
I don't have immediate family. I do have, some cousins who have, chosen to stay on the island, because what ends up happening is you get to a certain age and it's very limited in terms of education, college, university. So most families will either move so that their, kids can get, a higher education, because even though some of the Caribbean islands have universities, mm-hmm. It's tougher to get in because there are so few of them that it's very, very competitive. So people will tend to either, move to the United States, or they'll move to Canada just to give their kids, a better opportunity for education. Although the British system is pretty good, which it was.
Mm-hmm. Okay, interesting. So in your bio, you mentioned that you are a travel industry executive, or you were a travel industry executive. So I love to travel. Tell me about that a little bit. Tell me about one of the best trips that you've ever taken.
Well, I have to say every spare dime I have tends to go to travel, and I kind of go in and out of the industry. I started off years ago as an international flight attendant right out of college. So I had the travel bug because clearly I didn't have the funds to travel, but I was working for a major airline, and I got to stay at very nice hotels, and I got to see parts of the world that most people would never see on someone else's dime. And then I went into management from there. So I've kind of bounced around. I've worked for several different airlines, and I've also worked for cruise lines. And I still dabble in the industry. By dabble, I mean right now I'm a contract worker with a cruise line that is a paddle boat cruise line, like the old steam paddle boat cruise lines that they go up and down the Mississippi in different places. So when I do contract work for them, I'll fly to different ports. make sure everything, goes as it should. Because especially in the days of, we're coming out of a pandemic. During the pandemic, they were one of the first cruise lines to be given the okay to go back, because there's most of these steamboat cruises are pretty small. When I said pretty small, maybe they have 175, 200, 300 people on them.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm used to working with the ones that are 4,000, 5,000. So
Mm.
I still do that. I, recently actually just came back from Boston with them. There was their special, fall cruise. So I still keep my finger in the industry. In terms of travel, let's see. Oh, goodness. I have been to some places that a lot of people would not be able to get into. I was very fortunate. I had about 3 or 4 different passports. I had a British passport, I had a Vincentian passport, and I had an American passport.
Wow.
So I used to be able to get into places that, most Americans were not welcomed, or there was unease about,
Mm-hmm.
so they would use me because I had passports. I still am very, very fond of Asia.
Mm-hmm.
I like places like Bangkok. I have been to Tokyo, Hong Kong. Funny story to relate, I was in Saudi Arabia a few years ago. Still very strict, and of course not very friendly to women. So, the hotels, you had men on one side, women on the other, especially you couldn't use the pool. Well, I landed, in Dhahran in Saudi Arabia, and I got hustled into the back. And of course, I was like concerned, what's going on? You have these official people and they're carrying on. And I'm thinking, oh my God, I'm going to get arrested. Turns out I had forgotten I had a Cosmopolitan magazine in my tote bag.
Oh my
And
goodness.
it was too much cleavage. So,
Wow.
yeah, the American embassy had to get involved. It
You
was
are
really,
kidding me.
oh, yeah. It was quite entertaining. Yeah. And, the funny thing about it is, there's a certain hypocrisy level because, when I
Right.
landed there, as in
Mm-hmm.
pull up of all these very wealthy sheiks, and they wanted to take you out, So it was
Mm-hmm.
actually kind of interesting.
Right. Wow.
Yeah.
That's fascinating. I mean, when you said the American embassy had to get involved, I thought, my goodness, they really didn't like that magazine, huh?
Well, they're serious. I guess they figured I was going to corrupt their people, because it's
Yeah.
Cosmopolitan. It wasn't a porn magazine. So I
Hmm.
guess they just didn't like, the amount of cleavage shown. I've had some interesting stories from, my travels. I traveled to France once by myself. I actually was transiting it. I wasn't even staying in Paris. And all of a sudden, this man fell in step with me and he flashed his badge. And I realized like he was their answer to the FBI, but I guess he was profiling me as here's this woman traveling by herself, woman of color traveling by herself. What's going
Hmm.
on? So then I was really nervous. So I just kept walking, and he said to me, asked me, basic questions. What's your name? What are you here for? I'm thinking, I'm catching a flight to someplace else. And then I guess he figured that I was not probably who he was looking for, nor was
Right.
I carrying whatever he thought I was carrying. So he just kind of walked away after that. But that really made me nervous because, you don't realize the rights that you have here that you
Hmm.
don't have, in other countries. Anybody can pick you up, as you can tell with the news, what's going on, even over in Russia, etc.
Right.
It's scary.
Yeah, I've had some interesting experiences in France myself,
Mm-hmm.
because they ask you for your papers if you're walking around, and you
Mm-hmm.
have to show your ID and things like that. And the very first time I went, I also had an odd situation where
Mm-hmm.
they pulled me out of the line and started going through my bags.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember later a friend of mine telling me it was probably because, like you said, being a Black woman, and I flew
Mm-hmm.
in from Chicago, and they
Uh-huh.
had these ideas about people from Chicago. So they
Mm-hmm.
were making sure I didn't have drugs or something. It
Mm-hmm.
was really, I mean, nothing happened, but it was just so odd to be pulled out of a line and have them pull me into this room and go through my things. I was like, what are you looking for?
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, very different when you travel.
It's not uncommon, I will tell you, because I've had that coming back even from Asia, coming through San Francisco,
Mm-hmm.
Hong Kong, or places like that, with for when you used to be able to get into Hong Kong freely. Let me just clarify that. But, we would go there and we would buy, sometimes knockoffs. And you would, come back, with they had a lot of, like pearls that were, I wouldn't say they were authentic pearls, but they didn't go through the normal maturation process. I don't know if that's the right word for it. And, we would come back and sell a lot of this stuff. We're not talking about a lot of money. We're talking $10, $12. You paid $4 for it. You paid the 10 or 12. And what I found was coming back especially through San Francisco, my goodness, always got pulled over because, and again, back then, you were wearing like a fur coat, which is not fashionable anymore either, because you bought the fur coat there at some, incredible price. So the whole, the whole image, I guess, shouted to them, this person is going to try to, sell something or, whatever. But, France is always interesting because I remember years ago when I first went to Paris, people would come up to me because there's a huge Algerian population. So they immediately think that you speak French. I'm like high school French, barely, I'm more fluent in Spanish than anything else. And the shopkeepers would get so upset with you. They would just, when you didn't, you gave them this kind of like deer in the headlights, look.
Right.
They would just go poof and walk away.
Right. If you don't speak French, they don't know. No,
exactly. You. You're not one of us. Nope.
Exactly. Oh man, very interesting. I love talking about travel. We can talk about this the whole time. But okay, so moving on to the next question. I wanted to ask you about cooking, because that's another thing I enjoy doing, cooking. Do you cook much? And if you do, what is your favorite dish that people just absolutely love that you cook?
Well, I have to tell you, I am not a chef. I am not a cook. If I can't make it in 20 minutes, it's not happening. And I have to tell you, I got really spoiled because my ex-husband was a wonderful gourmet cook. And he was one of these guys out of my kitchen, don't touch anything, just get out of my kitchen. So for years, I just got really spoiled because he was so good that I didn't have to try. And of course, when you have somebody like that, they're a critic anyway. So I am a lousy cook. I will have to admit, I will eat. I love to eat. But in terms of putting anything together, my stove is permanently on broil.
Fair enough. Okay, so I was good. My next question was going to be, are you bad at anything? So should I just assume that cooking would be the thing you mentioned? I'm not. I mean, it's edible, okay, but it's not great, okay. But in terms, I am bad in several things. It's funny. I came from, both of my parents at one point were professional athletes. They were also, one was actually an educator, and the other one was a civil, engineer. But they also, growing up, especially when they had me, they played for, you might be familiar with this, the Commonwealth Games, which is sort of the equivalent of the Olympics here. So the reason I mention this is because I am very, what's the word for it? I'm not coordinated with this stuff. I go to the gym, I try my best to keep in shape, but if you put me in a game, I'm a spastic. So I am horrible at that. So, and I will own it, and I will admit it. I'm really bad at stuff like that. There you go. At least you know.
It's embarrassing. Let's put it that way.
All right, so I'm going to pivot a little bit and start asking you a little bit more about your writing journey. I'm curious to know how you got started in publishing, and why did you pick romance?
I was actually a reader, and everybody always goes, well, what is a reader? Well, as a reader, let me just take a step back and explain. I was at one of the conferences we talked a little bit about before everyone joined us, and I was at a cocktail party. And at the time, I belonged to New Jersey romance writers. So I'm talking to this woman at a cocktail party, I'm circulating and I'm talking. And she said I asked her, well, what do you do? Blah, blah, blah. She said, I'm a reader. I said, well, so am I. But I'm thinking reader. Okay. She said, no, I read for Harlequin at the time. Silhouette was still alive. She said, I read for Harlequin Silhouette. She said, you're not going to make a ton of money on this, but, they get so much stuff in their slush pile, unsolicited manuscripts, that they hire people like you and me to read the book and tell them if they should, proceed. Is it worth a second look to them, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I was really interested. I had a full-time job in the travel industry in the New York area. And she gave me the contact information. I reached out and they sent me, I think, a couple of books. And they sent me a 2-page, evaluation form on how to, evaluate, these books. And I did it. And I was surprised when they contacted me and said, you're hired. So I did it for 7 years. Even after I moved to Florida, I was still reading for them. And then I thought to myself, goodness, I can do this. I thought I was a fairly decent writer, but my goal had never really been, to be a writer. And I enjoyed romance because, again, growing up in the islands, you had a very limited reading things that you read. And when I say limited, simply that you have 3 or 4 bookstores on the island, you are going to read whatever the bookstore gets in.
Right.
The men read romance. So anyway, talking about cocktail parties again and conferences, I go to a cocktail party this was in Florida this time. And unfortunately, this editor is no longer with us. She passed away a few years ago, and she was a very young editor, Monica Harris, the sweetest woman you could possibly think of. And we're talking, and she was at that point acquiring historicals. And I don't write historicals. So we just, we chit-chatted a bit and, left it at that. She wanted me to go to South Beach with her. I said, no, I think I'm going to go home. Today's world, I probably would have gone, great opportunity. And then the multicultural line opened up and she was heading it up. I think she was working at, was it Kensington at the time? Yeah. And so she reached out to me and said, if you have anything, send it to me. And I'm one of these people, I just have a tendency not to follow the tried and true. I knew from reading the manuscripts that there's certain things you just don't do, at the time anyway. You didn't put sports figures together with, or you couldn't sell sports figures. Now it's a different story. You couldn't sell entertainers, but I had a story with an entertainer and I had a story with I think he was a basketball player at the time. I submitted that. She said, I love your writing, but do you have anything else? So I had started another book at the time, and just 3 chapters. And again, please don't listen to me, folks, because I do everything, I guess, wrong, or everything they tell you not to do. I submitted the 3 chapters that I had of the other story, and she said, is there anything else that you have? I'd like to sign you on for a book contract. And that's how I got started.
Wow, that's amazing. Now, I had never heard of a reader. Was that the precursor to the acquisition editor, or is it the same?
No, they are, and I still think they have them because they get so much stuff that it's unsolicited.
Oh, okay.
It's anybody who, is not a published author, because what they want is the pure enjoyment of the book.
Oh, sort of like a beta reader, probably that.
Right, exactly.
Okay, gotcha.
Except you get paid for it.
Right,
yeah.
Right.
You're not the maker. They pay you by the page numbers. It's a great job for maybe, a stay-at-home mom, somebody who's reading anyway. I would do maybe 3 or 4 books a month, but, they would pay anywhere from, 50 to 100 and a quarter, depending on how many pages that, they submitted. And some of them were very, very interesting. And of course, there was some that really, there was an opportunity for improvement because you have a lot of new writers, who were submitting.
Right.
But it was a kind of a cool, I did it for 7 years. So it was a really cool job, even, even when I moved here to Florida. And then once I got published, of course, that was the end of it. I think I got officially fired.
So based on your experience, what do you consider the key ingredients of a great romance novel?
I think it has to resonate with the reader. And when I say that, I mean, it's got to tug at the heartstrings. I could give you the standard answer, conflict, conflict, conflict. And of course, there has to be conflict and there has to be an arc and, all of that. But
Right.
I'm basing it on some of my stories, the ones that have gotten the highest ratings. It's usually the tearjerker, the one
Mm-hmm.
that really appeals to the reader. I have a book that I read and I brought it out under several different, titles. I got the rights back. Right now, I think it's called His Golden Heart or something like that. Or maybe that was the old one. It used to be something Chance. I don't remember anymore. That has been one of my highest rate. And it's a story about actually an athlete, who injures himself and his physical therapist. And he's bitter and he's angry because he was the great black hope, for the ski team. And I
Mm-hmm.
always try to stay away from stereotypes. And let me explain why, because I find that people seem to think, they pigeonhole you. If you are, an Asian person, then you're good at math,
Mm-hmm.
if you're, a black person, you're good at basketball, that type of thing.
Right.
So I always try to educate my reader so that they realize that we come from so many different backgrounds, and we are not everybody is from the ghetto, you know what I mean? Which
Mm-hmm.
unfortunately is what is, shown on TV a lot. And for people who are not, familiar and they don't have friends of different backgrounds, they presume that is the upbringing. So I always try to, and this particular um, young man had started off, he had been adopted. His parents made sure he got ski lessons and, the whole bit. So when he injures himself, it's, there goes his chances. There goes the US's chances too, because he was like the most promising, athlete. So I tend to, that particular book has always gotten really, really good reviews, even when I brought it out a second time after I got the ratings back. So I think that's, it's got to be something that resonates, with the reader, so you can not just relate, but it gets you in the gut and you want to keep reading. And of course, you're rooting for the, hero and you're rooting for the heroine.
Right. I think you're right too, because as particularly I feel like when we can show the hero being emotional or vulnerable or something like that, a lot of times that really touches the reader.
Mm-hmm.
And so it makes the character more memorable, makes them want to discuss it with other people, that kind of thing, get the word of mouth going.
Mm-hmm.
So I can absolutely see what you're saying, that yeah, the emotional component is a big one for making a really great romance novel, for sure.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
How do you find that in your own writing? I'm
I
curious.
do, yeah. I'm just thinking about one book actually, as you were saying that, where I've had so many people talk about the fact the title is The Rules, and it's part of my Johnson family series.
Mm-hmm.
And the hero, he felt he had survivor's remorse, basically. And so it was kind of why he behaved a certain way in the story. He was always engaging in risky behavior. But there's a
Mm-hmm.
scene, an emotional scene between him and his mother. And I've had so many people talk, mention that to me.
Mm-hmm.
So I
Mm-hmm.
think that seeing him be vulnerable and hurting emotionally and that kind of thing really touched a lot of readers. So
And I think especially when it's a male, you know what I mean? Because,
exactly, yeah.
we don't really see a lot of vulnerable males. At least when I was growing up, stiff upper lip and what have you. So I think it's nice to see, a male who is in touch with his feelings, who is vulnerable, and especially, that he's connected with his mother.
Mm-hmm. And what was the title of the book that you mentioned? That you said with the hero that was skiing.
Yeah, I think it's his Golden Heart now.
His,
I changed the title.
mm-hmm.
It's on Amazon when I got the rights back to the book.
Okay, just wanted to make a note of that. All right, so tell me about your writing process. From the moment you get an idea until you type the end, what's the process that you go through to get your book on paper?
I think we chatted a little bit before. I am like the most disorganized writer you can think of. I do keep a notepad next to my bed because there are times my brain races and I'll get up in the middle of the night. I was like, oh, there's a storyline. Even driving, I have a pen. I will hear something on the radio and it will because I'm big on what ifs,
Right.
What if this happened? So I write down this real rough outline of a story that's percolating. And I'll do it longhand half the time because usually by the time I boot up the computer, it's gone out of my memory. So I just kind of scribble something. And then, as I said before, I am not disciplined. So the only reason you will get a synopsis from me is if, traditional publishing, the editor wants a synopsis, then I will provide a synopsis. But other than that, I'll have just a vague idea because I'm a seat of the pants writer. Charts drive me crazy.
I'm starting to think most of us are because I'm just trying to think of the people that I've interviewed so far, and I think only one person was an outliner. So many people are seat of the pants writers, it seems.
I found though in my writing groups anyway, that a lot of them are big on plot lines and storylines and
character sheets and
Excel spreadsheets, and then they get by these games that they play to put things together. And I'm thinking that would make me crazy because the time spent doing all of that, I could be writing.
Exactly. I'm the same way. I can't spend that much time putting all that together. And the other word that I've heard used for the way that you and I write is discovery writing, which you discover more about the story and the characters as you continue writing, as opposed to trying to put everything down ahead of time before you start writing. So.
I would agree with you on that because what I have found sometimes is that my character is not fully fleshed out until the book ends, my first draft.
Right.
And then I go click, I get it. This is what drives him or her. There's always a missing piece, because there's got to be motivation, obviously, and I might have some general idea of what the motivation might be, but the reality of the matter is that I may be off by something's just not happening. But by the end of the story, I've got that character, and then I go in and clean it up and do what I need to do.
Yeah. Sounds pretty much like the same way that I write. Okay, so do you have any favorite characters you've written, hero or heroine? And what makes them special to you?
Let me think. Actually, there was a book that I wrote, which I would consider probably more women's fiction. And, here it is again, the title evades me, but it'll come to me eventually. Because I wrote this one a few years ago too, and it's a bigger book, but it's a story about, and his first name was Xander. And what I liked about him is, well, let me just give you a little bit of the storyline. So imagine this woman seeks to get in vitro fertilization. Okay, she's married at the time. She's trying to have a baby. It's not working. She and her husband go and they, find a, clinic, try to find, the right match that looks like them. And this is an interracial, relationship. And then they have this child and then they get divorced several years later. The kid is now actually diagnosed with a pretty serious, disease. So she has to go back to the clinic at this point and find out. And of course, the records are sealed because back then they did, and see if she could find out the information about this man. And she's able to piece together, the information, and has to show up basically and contact him and beg him. And he has just lost his wife. So he is not interested in any conversation with some crazy woman, that because he was, in graduate school trying to get, a degree and donating sperm so he could get money.
Right. Wow.
So he was like one of my favorite characters because they had to get from one place to another place. And of course, the child, you have to imagine your child, he'd lost one of his child, actually, his twins, in an accident with his wife. And now he finds out he has another child. So
Right.
that was definitely one of my favorites.
Oh wow, that sounds really interesting. Okay, so if you can't remember by the time we get off, you have to email that to me because that sounds like a really interesting story. I
I'm
want.
going to look it up.
Okay. All right. So let's start talking about Naughty in New York. For everyone who's listening who might not have read the book, tell us just a quick summary of the characters and the plot.
Okay, I'll do that. I remember it's called Just You, the book I was just talking about,
Oh, what was
and
it?
it's a
Just
Just
you?
You.
Okay,
Yeah, because of
great.
course with that kind of match, it can only be one person. You cannot, it's very rare that you're going to find, a
Mhm.
match, to help your ailing child. It has to
Right.
be the right combo. Yeah.
Great.
So anyway, okay, so let's on to North New York. Betty Griffin, I don't know if those of you who are familiar with her, she's author Betty Griffin. I've known Betty forever and ever. And we put our heads together, probably about 5 or 6 years ago. And we thought, you know what, there's so many different series out there. But what if we came up with a series around a red dress? In other words, a rented dress for the season. We wanted to do a holiday story. And we were going to write, each of us was going to write two novellas each. So Betty wrote Love on Lakeview Drive in Chicago. I wrote Naughty in New York. She wrote Holiday in Houston. And then I wrote Loose in Las Vegas. Okay. So Naughty in New York, I grew up in New York. So
Mhm.
I tend to choose places that I've been to because, again, it's, I guess, lazy. It's not as much research for me. It comes naturally for me. And I did a what if as well, too. Everybody likes a second chance story. And
Right.
so I thought it's the holiday season. It's all about hope. What if you have two people? And I really wanted, again, this is another interracial story, but I didn't want to make it one of these stories where, the focus is on there are two people getting together of a different ethnic background or race.
Mhm.
So what I did was I thought, okay, here's this woman who has been successful or is successful. And she's up for what she thinks is she's going to get, a promotion because she's worked really hard. And we were talking about France before, right?
Mhm.
So the hero, she had met the hero when they were interning in France. And then the relationship fell apart after they went their separate ways. So this is several years later. She is working, at this time, she doesn't realize that she's working for his sister, or stepsister. And she's
Mhm.
at this big holiday party and she is excited because she thinks that they're going to announce her promotion. And her assistant had gotten her rented dress. And she wasn't really happy about the dress because it was sort of a foo-foo red, dress, that's almost like a princess dress. And, she was looking at it from the point of view of, this is not normally my style of this dress, but I have no time now to find another dress. I trusted her. I got to put this dress on and I have to go to this, this party, this big bash. So while she's there, she sees, her boss comes out with a fellow who looks vaguely familiar and introduces him as basically the position that she wanted. So she thought, oh my God, you know what I mean? I have been pushed aside. And she's thinking, he looks familiar, but what is he doing here? So he turns out actually to be the fellow that she'd been involved with, in France several years ago. Ending was not so good, because he didn't return her calls. He never heard from him again after they left. So, there's some animosity, there. He comes over to her and he is pleading his cause, telling her there's a misunderstanding. Of course, she's saying you're full of crap, you know what I mean? And then it turns out really that the um, the roommate that
Her
she had at the
terrible
time,
roommate. I
yes,
cannot believe.
but it happens, doesn't it? It does,
Yes.
I mean, it's happened to me just as an aside, in real life where, I'm divorced, I'm out there and I've had, friends who, have either, bad mouthed, a particular gentleman that I might have been interested in, only to find out, that he either had turned him down you know?
Mm-hmm.
So things are often not what they seem, or the person said, oh, she's not interested in you because they had an agenda, right?
Right, right.
So anyway, these two people have to work together for obvious reasons because, she's still an employee of his sister, and they get through the whole, process together, but they're still, she still has, some resistance to him. And one of it is trust. Plus, she found out that he's engaged to somebody, in France. Of
Mm-hmm.
course, he breaks off the engagement, because things weren't going well, and so on and so forth. And of course, there's always a happily ever after.
And
So,
I
mhm,
thought too that it was really interesting just how quickly Anderson was ready to jump back into the relationship with
mhm,
Theo. I thought that that was really nice because despite she had all this hesitation, and when you think about it, he thought that she had rejected him all that time,
mhm,
that she
mhm,
had not returned any of his correspondence or
mhm,
anything like that. But then when he sees her, he's so ready to just dive back in. I thought that that was really sweet. It just, to me, just showed how much he still really loved her, cared about her, that for
mhm,
him, she had always been the one,
mhm,
basically the one that got away,
mhm.
essentially.
Well, it's interesting because I had one person who reviewed the book and felt that the relationship, but again, remember, this is a novella, okay? So you
Mm-hmm.
got a lot of has to happen within 20,000
A
words.
short period, yeah.
Yeah. But the reviewer felt that he was too quick to jump back into it. And what I was basing it on, this is what I have found with men, okay? And I have a lot of male friends,
Mm-hmm.
probably a lot more male friends than female friends, because they're very comfortable, sharing when you're not a romantic interest of theirs.
Right.
Yeah.
Very, very candid.
Yeah. Well, what I have found with men is there's usually a one for them, and
Mm-hmm.
they may go through a bunch of different women, but their heart is usually with one person.
Mm-hmm.
And given the opportunity, unless it's a really bad breakup, with, someone doing awful things, they are willing to step back into that relationship very quickly
Mm-hmm.
because they just don't give their hearts that easily.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how our listeners feel about this, if anybody wants to share, but that's been my experience with the men that I know, friends of mine, and they may even be dating other people and have somebody
Right.
in their arm 24/7, but they're still in love with somebody
They're
else.
still in love with someone else. And I
Yeah.
think too that if they really want someone, they will pursue that person. And to me, that's kind of what I saw with
Mhm,
Theo and Anderson, because when he saw her immediately, it was like, okay, I still want this woman. I'm not gonna
mhm,
let her get away again.
mhm, mhm.
That kind of thing.
And I agree with you. I mean, it's funny. I have a friend who I will occasionally go, female friend, I will
Mhm.
go out with, okay? And she tends to, she's single, divorced, and she's checking out the potentials around. And I've said that to she, oh, let's walk around. I'm like, look, you know, if the fellow has seen you and he's interested, trust me, he will be leaned against a column next to you and he will find some reason to come over and have a conversation.
Yeah.
So walking around to be visible is going to do absolutely nothing because that's how men are.
Yeah, I agree. It's very rare that they don't move on someone that they're interested in.
Mhm.
That's,
Exactly.
yeah,
Mhm.
very rare.
Mhm.
Okay, so as an author, I think you're probably just like me and other authors where we have this dream that our books could be made into movies. That's everybody's dream, right? And so,
Mhm.
what I wanted to ask you is who would you cast in the movie about this book? Who would you cast as Theodora and Anderson?
Good question. Probably Kerry Washington,
Okay.
as the female,
Mm-hmm.
and probably Thor, Chris Hemsworth,
Ooh.
as the male. Yeah.
Okay. I
because
like
he was
that.
just, he was just so different from her in a lot of ways, with his upbringing, where he came from and the background. Not that
Right.
she was, I mean, she was a successful woman, but it was just, definitely two different people from different walks of life.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of the movie, if I can pop in, I've heard so many nightmare stories from my friends who were fortunate enough to have, a book optioned,
Mm-hmm.
about the actual either money they got or the input that they had that I really,
Yeah.
I hate to say it, it's really not one of my goals.
Oh,
I
it's
mean,
not.
I wouldn't be upset if Hallmark came tapping, but
Mm-hmm.
I've heard a lot of nightmare stories.
Yeah. I've been fortunate. I have not heard very many nightmare
Mm-hmm,
stories, although I have heard, like you said, you don't get to have much input.
mm-hmm,
And if you do, that's something you definitely have to negotiate
mm-hmm.
to
Well,
to have input into the story, be a writer or whatever.
mhm. Well, I think that some of it has to do as well too with the fact that, at one point I was writing for BET. We had a stable of authors. We started off Kensington. I think we ended up at BET. We went to so many different. They bought the whole stable of authors,
Mm-hmm.
and with BET, several of the authors, were solicited for their books. Some of the major names that individuals
Yeah,
probably
I
know and
remember.
read.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and the stories that I heard from them after and the amount of money that they attempted to give them, for nowhere in the six figures, let me tell you,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
for the story, sort of left,
A
a
bad
sour
taste.
taste in my mouth. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about,
Hmm.
actually. That's was it the arabesque line? A lot of
Yes,
those?
yes,
Yeah.
yes. Yeah, we were doing arabesque at the time. And then, it became, BET took over. I think we were there for like
Right.
3 or 4 years.
Yeah, I've heard those. You're right.
Yeah.
Now that you mention it, I remember hearing those stories when
Hmm.
I first started
Hmm.
writing and started going to meetings and meeting some
Hmm.
of the other Black authors and hearing those
Hmm.
stories. Yeah, I had forgotten about that. um, okay, so do you happen to have an excerpt you can share with us?
I can absolutely.
Great.
I'm going to my second computer now. That's
Okay.
lined up. I had to go on it. That's what I was telling you. I couldn't find the manuscript before. I was like, oh my goodness.
I'm glad you found it.
Yeah. Thank
And
you.
then set the scene for us and before you read and just let us know what it's about.
This is actually it's one of the opening scenes where she is actually at the party and she spots, Anderson, who she calls Andy for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and she realizes that's him. And so, you have that initial shock going on and and still the spark is there. So, but she's still angry.
Right.
So this is kind of her reaction to it. All right. So, oh God, it was Andy, older, handsomer, and now a senior executive at the company. By the slack-jawed expressions, you would have thought a case of cosmetics hit the floor. Alexandra had never once mentioned they were hiring a COO. Trust you to remind me of my manners, their CEO said, tapping the newly appointed senior executive on the shoulder. Why don't I leave you to get to know your team? Jennifer, shall we check on the caterers? So she's kind of watching him, from a distance after this is there.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, I'm sorry. Let me correct that. She has already met him because the next sentence is conscious of the man whose hand she still held. Theo was barely cognizant of Jennifer and Alexandra walking away, these executives from her company. Theodora, Anderson said, his midnight eyes never leaving her face. It's so nice to get reacquainted. Andy was all she could think to say. Paris in Treasury seems just like yesterday, Anderson said, confirming he was the lover she'd had such a difficult time letting go. Memory came flooding back and with it pain. She wanted to pull her hand from his, but that would mean creating a scene. Theo had been all of 19 when her parents were killed. She'd wanted to escape anything that reminded her of them. She'd been lucky to get an internship in Paris at one of the better cosmetic houses. She'd met Andy, one of the few Americans working at Treasury. He'd been interning in marketing and fluent in French. He had a huge floppy afro that no pick could tame. She teased him that he must have some black in him. It was Andy who had helped her navigate the language in a country where it was presumed dark skin meant you were Algerian and fluent in French. Back then, the French had little patience with Americans, especially those who didn't speak the language. And then I'm going to skip the other paragraph and just, Theodora, come back to me, Anderson murmured, looking at her through those unbelievable long lashes that would be the envy of most women. His navy eyes could be extremely expressive, especially when they made love. That was one thing she remembered. I'm sorry I was back in Paris for a moment, Theo said, summoning a smile from somewhere, though that was the last thing she felt like doing. Those were the best of times, Anderson responded, scanning the surrounding areas as if looking for an escape route. The group around them, though drinking and small talking, were acutely aware of their COO and were listening to every word. Anderson curved a palm around Theo's bare arm. She shivered. We should catch up. Meet you in the library after dinner. It's down the hallway and 2 doors to your right.
He just couldn't wait. As soon as they shook hands. I love it. I love when the men are like ready to go.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
That was good.
But men, as I said before, they're usually not shy when they want something. They're right there.
Right. Exactly. And someone like him, who's an executive, and this cosmopolitan type of man, he's definitely gonna make a move as soon as he can. He's not gonna be shy and hesitate. So I thought it made sense. Absolutely.
Well, thank you for saying that. But especially with reviews, not everybody is going to like your choices, of what you.
And it's subjective because it's based on. We've had this conversation in the past, actually, and it's based on individual lives and their experiences, what they're used to in their life, and what they're used to reading, even. So, it's completely subjective, but I liked it. So
thank you. That's very kind of you to say that. And thank you, Mitzi, for recommending me.
And the readers enjoyed it too. In fact, in the chat, Tressa was saying that she'd read the series and enjoyed them. So
that was very nice of her.
Yeah.
Thank you. We put the red dress to bed after the 4th one. We were like, okay, the red dress has had it.
I did not realize that was the link between the series. It was the dress. And the dress sounds so, I don't know, it just sounds big and puffy and elegant and over the top. Did you see something, or was it completely made up? Or did you have something that you were looking at to work with?
Well, that's a good question. That's funny you said it, because I was telling you before that I'm very disorganized with stuff like that. But Betty had actually set up like a Facebook page.
Okay.
And we could, post again what the characters look like. We posted the dress, and we kept altering the dress. She would find a red dress, I would find a red dress, and then we settled on a red dress. So that was one of the things. Yeah.
Great. All right. Well, that's it for my questions. We're going to wrap up now, but before we go, I wanted to ask you, do you have anything else that you're working on that you can let us know about?
Well, I'm always working on something. That's one of the things that, even if I'm not under contract, I always try to work on something. I just submitted, I shouldn't say just submitted, but several months ago to a major publisher at their request. And this is a bit of a different situation. When I say it's a bigger book, it's just to give you the storyline. The idea is to be a series, and it involves, 5 women whose lives are affected when one of them takes their life. So it's pretty serious. Yes, it's relationship driven. So I'm just sitting here waiting to hear back. This particular publisher takes about 6 months to get back to you, but has been communicating with me. So I'm very hopeful on that.
That's good.
I've actually resurrected a book I started 5 years ago. Every single time I have been trying to write this book, I get another opportunity. So I put this book aside. So now I brought it out again and dusted it up. And it's amazing that in 5 years, what can change? It's like when I first started writing this book, it was all about Skype. Now you've got to do Zoom. Who's on Skype having a meeting, right?
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. So it's good.
So
does anyone have any questions? None of the ladies have questions, or?
I don't see any questions in the chat.
Cool.
There was the one question about the book with the guy who is the hero who skied, and you gave us that title. So that's good. But Sharon did say that the book encouraged her to buy a red dress to wear for a book event.
Oh, good for you.
So you're influencing people with your work.
No, you know what? I love red. It's so funny. You said red makes me happy. And every time I put on something that's red, I feel very powerful in it.
Yeah.
It's like in the summer, it's yellow. I know that sounds weird. And I look at your little yellow dress over there under your name.
Yellow is my favorite color.
Yeah, it makes me feel happy. And this past summer, everything I owned was yellow. But around the holiday season or whatever, red just makes me feel so happy. So good for you, Sharon.
Yes. Okay, Marcia. Where can readers find you online? Give us your website address and your social media handles.
Yeah, my website address it's lovemarcia.com. So, and if you forget that, just put in my name, lovemarciaking.com. Just put the love in front of it. And I have to admit, the website needs to be updated. You can also find me. A lot of people join me on Sundays. I have Spicy Sunday. I started this off as a promotional thing, and it has lasted, I think I'm going on 6 or 7 years. I thought it would last 3 months. And it's relationship driven, so it's questions about a relationship, and the readers all pop in there and they give their opinion very loudly.
Is this on Facebook or where?
It's on Facebook. It's on Facebook. Every Sunday, it's called Spicy Sunday. And, I'll ask questions like, she makes more money than you. Will this relationship last? Something like that. Or out of the blue, this child appears, and your current husband, it's his kid. You knew nothing about this, so you can imagine some of the stuff gets really, I find, anything to do with finances and sex. Oh my God. Yes. People get very heated. So.
Yes. Controversial. Yeah.
Exactly. And I'm on Twitter and I'm on Instagram, just put my name in so you can find me on, almost any of the social media platforms. I'm not on TikTok. It's a little much for me to master.
Yeah. I don't I don't think I'm going there, although I might go back to Instagram next year. I'm still debating, but we'll see right now.
Well, why did you leave Instagram? I'm curious.
Oh, not of my own volition. They shut down my account for some reason.
Really?
There was this period a couple of years ago. I have no idea. And you can't get in touch with anyone. So
I know.
Yeah, it was just, okay, I guess this is it then. I can't be on Instagram right now.
Yeah, how strange.
But it was a couple of years ago, and they were randomly shutting down accounts because I was in this group and other authors had mentioned having problems. But it's possible that I was, I forget what you call it, regramming too much or something, like when you post someone else's work or whatever. Right. Giving attribution, of course. But it could have been that. It could have been because I was using a scheduler. That's what someone else told me. But I mean, I thought everyone used schedulers. You can't be on there all the time. So who knows what the reason was. I tried to get in touch with them, couldn't find out. So I've been off Instagram for a couple of years, and I'm thinking about getting back on there next year. We shall see. Because
I don't post that much. I will post a picture every now and again, share with readers a Halloween picture, a book cover, what have you. But I'm on there maybe once every 2 weeks.
Yeah. Well, see, it was so funny because when I started posting more frequently is when I got into trouble. Because before that, I was posting maybe once a week. And then I said, I really need to step my game up. I need to do better, yada, yada, yada. So I started posting 3-4 times a week. And I got this little warning. I didn't know what the problem was. So to find out. And then the second warning, they just shut me down. So
you think somebody complained? Because, I hate to say it, you would think that our author group is more supportive. But you and I know that sometimes that's not the case.
It's possible. Yeah. I mean, it's absolutely possible. I wish I knew, because so often these social media platforms, they don't tell you what you've done wrong. They
Mm-hmm.
just
Mm-hmm.
yank, they just yank
Right,
your account.
exactly. Mm-hmm.
And so, luckily, I mean, I have other social media
Mm-hmm.
handles and I have my email list and things like that. But it's very frustrating to not know what you did wrong because what if I do it again?
Right.
It's that
No,
kind of thing.
exactly. And you're right. It's very hard, to reach somebody. I was trying to, even reach somebody on Facebook about something, just a question I had to ask, and it's almost impossible.
Yeah,
You know,
it
I think they
really
say
is.
email them, you get no answer.
No
So,
answer. No one ever gets back to you.
yeah. Oh,
Yeah, I went through the whole thing with Instagram and had to fill out this form and to prove my identity, all this kind of stuff. And no one
mm-hmm.
ever got back to me. So,
Well, what a shame, though.
yeah, it is what it is, right? Well, thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate it. This was very enjoyable, and I liked talking about the story, but I also enjoyed just chatting with you about travel and all of that. It was really enjoyable for me.
Well,
So,
thank you. Maybe we should have a travel night, do a podcast with a travel night and get a whole
yeah,
bunch of, people involved about travel and what have you. That might be something different, right?
yeah, that would to kind of little talk about that because I
Uh-huh.
mean, I'm sure there's so many people with stories. Quite a few people in the Readers Lounge travel extensively
Mhm.
too, so it would be perfect actually.
So there you go. Exactly. We
Yeah.
might all learn something and decide that we're going to go to some place we've never been.
Right, exactly. Adventurous women. Well,
Thank you
thank
again,
you.
Mitzi, and thank you, Delaney, and thank you, everybody else, for attending. I appreciate it so much.
And thank you to everyone listening. Thank you to all of you who are here in the chat. An extra special thank you to our guest again, Marcia King-Gamble. Make sure you grab a copy of her novel, Naughty in New York. And until next time, laugh often, love hard, and read a lot. Thank you.
Happy Thanksgiving. Thank you, everyone.